hmm Greetings, everyone. This is H. Victoria Hargro Atkerson, and we're going to be doing some more reviewing. I want to go over my books with you, and my today I am doing the first three that I wrote, and here I am. Hi, good morning. How are things? I'm sitting here with a cup of tea as usual, and I'm going to tell you about some of my books. And the thing about book writing is that it's a very private activity, one that you will always treasure. I don't care if you write a good book, bad book, or whatever. There's a great sense of accomplishment when you finish one. So I wanted to talk about my first three books that I published, and made one mistake on the first two that I thought of at the time, and then I said no. I changed it, and that was on the book covers. It's the same book cover for both books, and I advise anyone going forward, don't do that. Make sure that you do something a little different for your second book, okay? But this is a wonderful book that I enjoyed writing because it took me to places I'd never been before. And I love that about writing because one of the things you do normally is to visit places mentally, educationally, that you never get a chance to see or discover in your actual life. So that's something I want you to take a look at and think about as you move forward. The first two were Stones Along the Path, part one and part two. And the story is amazing, and it's based on a lot of some personal experiences and some not so personal experiences, things that I wish I had seen or places I wish I had visited, things of that sort. And also a lot of family background and family issues that come up in any family. But in this particular one, the reason I was so fascinated by it because I there are stories in my family about duplicitous relationships where someone marries someone and think they're one person and discover years later they married someone completely different, and they go through this emotional trauma from that point on. That was something that was really sad, and it was rather shocking, but it was also one of those things that fascinated me about interpersonal relationships. Thinking about how can you love someone so madly and not know who they are? How do people do that? Well, it's human nature. It's a part of who and what we are. We make mistakes, and sometimes our hearts are not always the best judge of characters, but our emotional life sometimes is much stronger than other things. So we make those choices, but we also have to live by them. So that, with that said, I created this character, which I think stands up in the two books as a viable woman of substance. Her name was Jessica, and Jessica, like myself, was a Peace Corps volunteer. And some of the intertwinings that I took from my personal experience were not just the character or not my personal life, because I wish I did have her experiences, but I created an experience I would have wanted maybe to have as a young person. But the one thing that I did bring through was the cultural aspect of visiting a foreign country and adjusting to their normal and their daily life and their con- living conditions, which we often don't think about when we visit countries. Like when I travel today, I don't think about the living conditions of the people who are actually grounded in that space. I go to, visiting like someplace like the Dominican Republic, which I did a few years ago, um, and not realizing their conditions was something that I wish at some point I could get back to and actually experience on a personal level. But being a tourist, you live in a resort, there's a whole other Americanized world that surrounds you. Even the entertainment sometimes is horribly American instead of native to the country you're visiting. And for me, that's annoying. So travel is a wonderful tool for anyone who wants to write, because you learn different things. I don't care what aspect of that culture you absorb. This experience and these two books were taken from my 3 years in the Peace Corps, and it's like accumulations of impressions and attitudes that I formed and conditions that I met when I was under that program. So it's a wonderful love story, is what it is. And the dynamics of it is that it's bicultural. And then we have two different families who are integrating and who are pu- putting all their energies into this relationship. And the we have Jessica, and who we find her first in her native village, while she's when she's living in Africa, a place I've always wanted to visit. Haven't had the opportunity yet, but prayerfully that will happen. But taking my experience from the conditions I experienced in Brazil and putting them into this book, and imagining what they would be if it was an African country and an African environment that I was living in, and African people I were interacting with. That is some of the drive that was behind the story. Now, we talked about character development. So, the one thing I wanted to do was to anchor this character, Jessica, into that life and that lifestyle and what she did with that and how she managed and how you go through the process dealing with elements of the daily life of a Peace Corps volunteer. And then we take her from her her condition as we meet her to where she falls in love and marries this man. So the relationships and the the whole experience of her life goes from that point until she meets and married this wonderful guy. This not, well, we won't say wonderful. He was a deceptive person, but there are aspects of his character that we are all going to love and adore because of who he is as a character. And Jessica, who has come from a family that held her in pretty high esteem, because she was expected as the older child in the family to take lead on the parenting skills whenever the parents were not there. And that's something that happened in my family. The older child was always responsible for the younger ones. And we did that uh, religiously. And that was something that was kind of a anchor for the Black family, because most Black families, both parents had to work. And so in this case, it was a little different for Jessica, but that same role for her was an important part of her character, how she used it and how she used that behavior to propel her into a career of helping others. And it's just an interesting paradox. And it also shows the family dynamics in the Black family. You had the grandmother, you had the mother and the father, and a neighborhood of friends and family. So this particular book takes place in it starts in Africa, but then we migrate to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in the USA, and from there we go we go to her. We look at her childhood, and then we see where she came from, which is North Philadelphia. And then her teenage years, her parents moved to New York, and she's there doing most of her volunteer work as a child, which was something that I did as a child because and a teenager because my mother required it. As simple as that. So it's a great writing experience doing the research on Africa, which I've always done because it's a place that has always fascinated me. And putting yourself in that situation. As I said, as you do your character development, as you write, and as you tell your stories, you're going to let the characters speak. You have to divorce yourself as much as you can from your own personal personality because these characters are and should be independent people. They should have their own ideas about who they are and what they do and why they do what they do. And some of the things in this book that the characters were doing, I would never do, and probably would never be a possibility for me. But that's not something that I can allow uh, to interfere with the flowing of the story. So take a look at yourself in the mirror as you think about your characters. My one way of visualizing my characters as independent beings, and while I'm writing, I kind of feel them moving around in my space, not in me, but around me, so I can be objective in observing who they are and what they are and why they say what they say, why they do what they do, why they dress like they dress, how they stand, how they carry on a conversation, all their weaknesses and strengths. I try to incorporate all of that, but try to be an invisible person watching the characters move throughout the story. And as you introduce new stories, as I say, your protagonist and your uh, uh, antagonists and your protagonists. Those are the people you want to make sure you put your most energy in, whether the protagonist or the antagonist is a person or a thing. You want to concentrate your efforts on that. Sometimes you have more than one protagonist, and sometimes an antagonist become a protagonist, and sometimes the reverse happens. So this is a great read. They said the book travels back and forth from the States to Africa and from Africa to the United States. So it's a wonderful love story where Jessica meets and falls in love, and then she starts her life as a person who has been in a deceptive relationship. So take a look at these two. I think you'll enjoy it. I'm pretty sure you will. I enjoy writing it in any case. I enjoy writing it, and I even go back and read all my books just to get a flavor to see if that's still a valid story and kind of analyze it for yourself. And it's a good thing after you write a book, find some trusted friends that you can trust to read your manuscript and tell you the truth, not just, oh, that's a cute story, or I like that story. Well, what didn't you like about it? Oh, I did. There was nothing I found wrong with it. You don't want that person. You want someone who's going to dig in and tell you, like, hey, you need to. That doesn't make sense. For that character to say those words is not valid. That situation would never happen in real life, or that person is a ridiculous person and maybe you need to write it, or the last part of that story doesn't even make sense. That's a bad ending, that's a bad beginning, blah 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 blah. Let them tell you objectively. You write those concerns down, those critiques down, and you look at that, study it, and then evaluate what you want to move forward on or not move forward on. You may want to make changes, you may not, but you must always get true evaluations of your writing, because the more people that look at it and view it, the better for the book and the story, because your obligation is really outside of yourself. As I always say, we write in private, but our books live in the public arena. And excuse me, I forgot to turn my phone off. So uh, hold on one second, please. Uh, Hello, can I call you back? I'm doing a recording right now. Uh-oh. Hello? Hmm. Okay. All right. So let me turn that down so that won't happen again. And I must apologize for that. When you make a recording, turn your phone off and the volume, turn it down also. Okay. So the next book, these are two books, part one and part two. The next book I wrote was Walking Among the Kudzu. I don't know if you can see that. I'll upload these later, and maybe I'll do a summary of all six books together. But this is Walking Among the Kudzu. Kudzu vine are a ever-present feature of living in Atlanta, Georgia, because kudzu surrounds the city. Now, the story of the kudzu is that um, Georgia at one time, I guess in the early 40s, um, 30s, 40s, whatever, but they always had a problem with the red clay. It was always washing away, and there was a lot of erosion all over the city whenever anything happened. And to look at red clay running is like it's not a cute scene. Okay, but anyway, this plant was a gift to America from Japan. They gave it to us after World War World War II, and they said in giving us this plant, you may have won the war, but we gave you kudzu. But this is a severely invasive plant that grows everywhere. I had a friend who visited Atlanta, Georgia once, and she would say, "Oh, the one thing I just loved about Atlanta, Georgia, it had all those sculptured trees." And we said, "Sculptured trees? We don't have any sculptured trees. What are you talking about?" And then she showed me a picture she had taken. Honey, that's kudzu. It would grow over you if you stood still long enough. So that was something that one aspect of writing this book that I kept in tune with, it, not just the character of the plant, but what happens to the landscape once it covers it. And in thinking about kudzu, I thought about, because most of my professional work has been working with teenage girls, and thinking about the overwhelming effect of adolescence and growing up in our culture, how difficult it is and how absolutely overwhelming it can be for a young woman, and whether they have parents or not have parents, or whether it's one parent or not, different circumstances exist. Now, the character that I developed this book on was a combination of many that I had worked with, many people and young people that I met and had the privilege of working with. I should put it that way, but this picture here, you can't see it too well on here, but high gloss finish. You can see, if you can see that. I don't think you can, but I will upload it so you can see it later. It's a picture of a young woman standing in the middle of kudzu vines. That's something no one ever wants to do. Kudzu vines cover houses, and I'll upload some of that. Maybe I can show you a little um, video of that at a later date. But but kudzu vines cover everything: houses, cars, monuments, electrical wires, flagpoles, you name it. Like I said, if you stand still long enough, you will be covered in kudzu vines. And this story, that symbol, by the way, which was drawn by my nephew, Larry Duncan Anthony, he did a great job. And he lived next to a kudzu vine yard. I mean, it was an overwhelming landscape, and all you could see were kudzu vines forever and ever. So this is something that I used to help motivate me to write about this child's problems, which started adolescence, early childhood, adolescence, and how she was raised and how she ended up. So, and one of the things that I loved writing about her transition, because she goes through several, in discovering who she is as a person. A lot of people I discovered, surprisingly, when I started entering working, well, really started very early, finding out how other people live. And I once described to my mother, because bringing our child from school home said, "Oh, mom, she needs somewhere to stay. Her family's very poor." And my mother looked at me like I was crazy. She said, "Sweetheart, you're the one that's poor, and I cannot feed another child. So you can let her spend the night, but she has to leave tomorrow." I was like, "What do you mean we're poor?" I never thought of us as not having anything or being on a lower level of the economic scale because my mother did an excellent job. My father did an excellent job of providing for us. But this was during my high school years. But it was interesting and interesting revelation. So this child is, in some ways, was she started out well until her father died, and then after her father died, her life became more climatic and difficult for her to navigate, and the people around her, were some were supportive, some were not. And we have a good she's the protagonist in this story, and her antagonist was her mother and motherhood, I should say. So it's a great book if you have teenagers, or if you just want to explore those adolescent years and how that struggle, inner struggle, because most of us do have that when we're going through those stages, how the inner struggle helps to build your character and help you decide who you are, or who you are going to be as a person. So take a look at those books. I won't keep you too long today because we're going to go back to our our original topic, which was character development. And I kind of want to summarize that before we go to another subject matter about writing. It's a very good tool to do to consider when you're creating characters for people to read about. You want to give them someone to hold on to. You want to make them memorable, and you want to make them realistic, logical, and valid. So, one of the biggest things I can tell you in presenting your book is when you present that character to your reader, because all books and manuscripts are meant to be read. So you want to make sure that character that you are writing a clear picture of who that person is, of the circumstances. Maybe she starts in one area of her behavior, her character, and her surroundings, and ends up in a entirely new environment. But you want to show that growth, and you want to show those high points and low points so that the reader can see the natural development, no matter how traumatic it is, logical development of that person's personality, where she began and where she ends up. So think about those issues as you do your work, and try to think about it, especially when it's regarding each one of your characters. Do not introduce a character in your book that's not needed, or someone that has no purpose. Everyone in your books must have a purpose, must have a desire, must have wants and needs, must have a goal, and must have a reason to be there. Otherwise, they're useless. So be careful of how much you put in your book. Sometimes editing is the best thing that can happen to a book. Tearing it away and putting it aside. Sometimes you just have to rip whole chapters out. You may even have to lay a book aside. I've done that for many years. Lay them aside and then pick them up when you can objectively read it and see it for what it is, not what you want it to be. Because a lot of our writing, it tends to be emotional because we're emotional beings, but we have to be our own critic, own best critic, and analyze our work and make sure we present the final product as your best work. So thank you for being here. And I love telling you about these books. I hope to get it read and much more than it is. And we'll be working on that process soon, also getting it out there. So I would like you to enjoy your life and enjoy just whatever you're doing, but most of all, enjoy the whole process of writing, and enjoy the fact that you are a writer, because it's something that we own as a culture, because writing started in Africa. Pen, pencils, the whole library system started in Africa. We are the progenitors of that. We're the owners of that. So let's get busy and let's uphold our heritage and our legacy. Okay? But thank you again. And you have a great, hopefully, I'll see you next Saturday morning at 9 o'clock. And I will hope that you will enjoy and read some of these books. I think you'll enjoy them and you'll remember those characters. And then take some lessons. Okay? You take care. Have a good weekend. Have a great week. See you next Saturday morning at 9. God bless.